Welcome to the Balanced Hustle podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Sherman, fitness coach for burnt out perfectionist. If you're ready to break free from overwhelm, simplify your nutrition, and make fitness finally work for you instead of against you, you're in the right place. Each week, we'll dive into easy strategies to balance your health with your busy life. Let's hustle for balance, not burnout. Grab a seat and let's dive in. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. This is podcast number 2, which is super exciting. We've already got our first podcast out of the way, so jumping right into things for podcast number 2. I haven't decided the title yet, but if you're listening, you'll see what I decided to name this one. But I wanted to do something fun today for the second podcast and kind of a little Q&A type situation. However, everybody tends to be really shy on Instagram when I put out question boxes, and I wanted to make sure I had enough questions to answer for this podcast. So I turned to ChatGPT. And if you haven't been using ChatGPT, where have you been? I avoided using ChatGPT for quite a while, because I was one of those people and I was like, I'm not going to let AI, take over my life. Artificial intelligence, I'm not about it. I don't need it. I can think with my own brain. I can, but ChatGPT has been super helpful. So if you don't know what ChatGPT is, it is an AI app. You can use the app or you can just use the web version, kind of like Google. And it's basically an AI search engine, but you can ask it all kinds of things and it will just spit the answers back at you. I don't know how it does it so fast. I don't care to know. I'm not a tech person. I don't want to know, but it is really cool. So I've asked ChatGPT to do things like give me recipes, to help me plan my schedule out. I've asked it for content ideas. I've asked it to, take content I've already made and give me some editing suggestions. It's really, really cool. And I will never use it to completely replace any of my writing or write content for me. I always want my content to come from me and, to be from my own brain, but it has been really awesome for ideas and even market research, what are people Googling, things like that. So that's what I used it for today. And I asked ChatGPT, because you guys tend to be pretty shy in question boxes. I asked it, what questions do women actually want answered from personal trainers? So again, I don't know how ChatGPT does its research, but it popped right up with 10 questions that it believes that women actually want answered from personal trainers. And I'd like to believe it got these questions from, questions that people are often asking on the internet and things like that. So I'm going to answer these today. And if you want to leave some more questions for me for the future, leave them in the comments. Ask me on Instagram and I'd be happy to answer any other questions I didn't answer in this video, or not this video, this podcast. I'm a podcaster now. So I'm going to answer some of these that ChatGPT has given me. I'm not sure if I'll get to all 10, but I'm going to kind of just pick some randomly here and get right into it. So what I thought was interesting, the very first one is a question that I see all the time on the internet, so I'm not surprised that it is on this list. And the first question is, how do I tone up without getting bulky? And I know that this is a question that is specifically asked by more women than men. I've never really heard a man ask this question. Not saying that they don't, but that's why I also asked ChatGPT questions that women want answered. So, how do I tone up without getting bulky? So, I know that it's a big fear for a lot of women, especially when we start talking about lifting weights and building muscle, that they are going to look like the Hulk, that they are going to start looking like the CrossFit girls that we see on Instagram. And women in general tend to be a little bit more scared of gaining muscle and looking bigger. And I think a lot of that comes from we've been told our whole lives, through magazines or through the internet or Instagram, that women are supposed to, look smaller and look thin in bikinis and things like that. So it's a very real fear that I think that we've beat quite a bit, that we've gotten past in the fitness space for many women, but many women still do have this fear and honestly don't want to get bigger or bulkier, right? So the question, how do I tone up without getting bulky? So a lot of women will ask me, how do I tone my muscles? I don't want to grow big muscles, right? So with that, I will say there really is no such thing as toning a muscle. We either build a muscle or we don't. We either grow a muscle or we don't. So that difference between being toned and getting bulky is not whether you should lift weights or not, whether you should build the muscle or not. If you want to look toned, you still have to build that muscle, right? So if we want to avoid getting bulky, what I will say is that it takes a really long time to get bulky. It takes trying. You have to really try to get bulky in most cases for women. I've been trying to get bulky for 8 years. It takes a lot of lifting heavy, takes lifting very heavy, really pushing that weight, a lot of protein, eating to get those bigger muscles and those gains. It takes a lot of trying. So what I would say, if you are in this camp of women who want to tone up without getting too bulky, I wouldn't be afraid. I know that can be kind of it can be easier said than done, right? I would get in the gym, I would start lifting the weights, start going for it. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself. Don't be afraid to pick up heavier weights and to keep pushing that weight because it takes years. It takes a very long time, and I've never seen anyone accidentally get bulky, right? Like accidentally get too big. So it takes really trying and a long time, like I've said. So if that is a fear for you, I would just go ahead, go for it. And if you want that toned look, it will actually take more weight and putting on a little bit more muscle than I think most women realize as well. So it's not just about running on the treadmill and doing a bunch of cardio. We need that muscle to start popping through also. So we do need to get in the gym, start lifting the weights. I love to see women in the gym lifting weights. It's my favorite, one of my favorite things in the world. So I would say just go for it. You will know. You will know when you start to get a little too bulky. It will take a long time. It will take years. And, most likely depending on your genetics. And then we can kind of go from there. But we do have to build that muscle to get that toned look. So hopefully that answers that question. And if you have any more questions about that, please let me know. Okay, let's see. What other questions do we have? Okay, here's another one. Similar to going for a certain look. So how do I get rid of belly fat or target specific areas? In terms of reducing fat. So another myth that I've seen online a lot is that we can choose where we want our fat to come off, right? If I just do a whole bunch of crunches and, blah, 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 then I'm going to lose the fat in my abs, and I'm going to be able to have a six-pack and see my abs. And that is also just another myth that the internet puts out there, that we can choose where we want the fat to come off. So We cannot spot reduce fat or target specific areas when it comes to that like we can with building muscle. So when we're building muscle, we can obviously choose where that muscle goes. So if you're spending a lot of time doing bicep curls, you're obviously going to be targeting putting muscle on in your biceps. If you're spending a lot of time working your core, then you're putting muscle on there. Fat is a little different. Losing fat is different. We can't choose where that fat comes off, right? So when we are, adding in a little extra cardio, working on reducing fat, it's going to come off where it wants to come off. And unfortunately, for everybody, this is different. So for some people, the first place that they'll lose fat is in their face, and you can see a difference there. For other people, it'll be arms, their legs, it's different for everybody. So we can't choose exactly where we want it to come off, but what we can do is focus on targeting specific areas where we want to build muscle, and then that way, as we recomp, is what it's called when you're putting on muscle and losing fat at the same time, those areas that you really want to work on will start to shine because the muscle will be coming through as you lose fat. So that's how that works. We can't pick, unfortunately. I wish we could, but we just can't pick where we want to lose fat specifically. Next question. What should I do if I'm not seeing progress? So this is for my ladies that have been working out for a little while and they're not seeing the results they want to see. So, number one, I want you to ask yourself if you've been consistent with the routine that you've been doing. Have you been showing up consistently, or have you been showing up here or there 1 or 2 times a week, kind of miss a couple weeks here and there and, miss a few days and kind of fall off track? And just ask yourself if you've been consistent, first of all. That is a huge thing that I think sometimes we can tend to lie to ourselves about, or even just not realize that maybe we've gone, 2 weeks without showing up. That could be why you're not seeing progress. Now, if you know that you've been consistent and you've been showing up 3, 4, 5 times a week, you've been putting in the work, but you are still not seeing progress, there are a couple other things that we can start to look at. So the first thing that I would ask is, okay, if you have been being consistent and you are not seeing progress, have you been tracking your progress? So you may just feel like the weights aren't moving if you're, lifting weights, or the scale isn't moving. Have you been tracking that progress, whether it's with the scale or the weights? So if you are focused on lifting right now and you want to see that number go up and be, for example, shoulder pressing 25 pounds and you're at 20 right now, have you been writing down every workout what you are doing for reps, weights? Have you been keeping track of that? Because that is super important when it comes to making progress, and it's something I wish I would have done way, way sooner, because years ago, I would have just been doing the same exercise at the same weight for months and months and months, because that was like my weight, like, I can shoulder press 15 pounds. This is what I do. This is what I show up. I do my 3 sets of 10 or whatever it is, and this is what I do. But I was not keeping track and watching like, oh, okay, so last time I did, say I did 3 sets of 10, this time let me up the weight and see if I can get 8 to 10 still with that weight. And I really like doing it kind of in a range like that. So if I'm doing a shoulder press, for example, and I'm aiming to do 10 every workout, well, if I can consistently keep hitting 10 every single workout with the same weight, then it's time to up my weight again. And maybe it gets a little hard to get to like 8, right? So then I am choosing a new weight where it's difficult to get to 8, but I can still get to 8. And I'm working towards getting to 10 with that weight. When I start to get to 10 with that more consistently, then I choose a new weight that's more challenging, right? So, and if I was never keeping track of that, writing that down, I would never know. And sometimes you have wins that are small that you will just never remember. So I've had clients in the gym who I've seen them just, we add 5 pounds here, 10 pounds here. We add 2 reps here, 3 reps here, 3 more than last time. And those things can just go so unnoticed if you are not keeping track of them and writing them down. And that will definitely help you make more progress in the gym, as well as help you push yourself. So if it was like, last time I did, 2 sets of, last time I did 3 sets of 10 at 20 pounds. So this time I'm going to try to do, 3 sets of 8 to 10 at 25 pounds. And maybe the first set you get 10, and then the next 2 you only get 8, and you can't get past 8. That's still progress because you've upped your weight for all of those reps, and you've got an additional 2 reps in the beginning there where you can continue to aim for 10 the next time on the second and third round, if that makes sense. I might have babbled a little bit there, but just keeping track of things would be huge. As well as, with that, performing the same exercises over and over again. So with my clients, what I like to see us do is we perform very similar exercises for about a month. So 4 to 6 weeks, we stay consistent with the types of exercises that we're doing, and we're practicing the same things over and over again. And I always preface this by saying, immediately you're going to think, wow, that sounds incredibly boring. I want to mix things up every time. But it actually, if you've never tried it, give it a try, because it can be a lot more exciting than it sounds. Your first week or 2, you're kind of figuring things out. And then you have a couple weeks. If you're doing 4 weeks, if you're doing 6 weeks, you've got longer. But then you've got some additional weeks there to start pushing yourself, to start having fun, and start to build those patterns that I was talking about when you are tracking and seeing those numbers change week after week. If you are mixing things up every single week, you're never going to see that progress, and you're never going to have those numbers that you can continue to build upon and improve upon every week. So that would be my next suggestion if you're not seeing progress, is to start doing things a little bit more repetitively, and you can do that for about a month and then switch to something else the next month that focuses on another goal or challenges you even further. Now, if you've been doing both of those things and you're still not seeing progress, my final suggestion would be to mix it up a little bit more. Try something new that you haven't tried before. Maybe try a new form of cardio, add in some jump rope, some running, something new that's going to challenge you a little bit more, and start mixing it up there. So that would be my few suggestions if you are not seeing progress. Okay, where are we at with time? Okay, good. We're doing good. Let's see, what other questions do we have here? Okay, here's a big one. So what's the best way to stay motivated and consistent? This is huge. So I know that when a lot of people start their fitness journeys, and I've been here multiple times, we have a lot of motivation, right? And we're ready to kickstart something new. We're ready to grind, ready to work hard, and we're going to hit all of our goals, right? This can happen, really any time that you decide to start a new routine, We'll see this a lot of the time around New Year's. Everybody's motivated, they're ready to hit their goals, and we're ready to go, right? And then that doesn't last, right? So I've had motivation where I've gone to start something new and it literally lasts for 3 days. And that's just the truth of it. And then there's times where it can last a few weeks, maybe a month, and then we fall off, right? And we kind of ride that wave of motivation as long as it will take us, and we start to rely on it, right? And then what happens when motivation stops showing up? We usually stop showing up too, right? We're like, well, I'm just not feeling motivated today. I'll go tomorrow. This week's been kind of tough. I'll go next week, right? Things like that. And the motivation is not showing up to help us anymore. So what do we do when that stops? And the short answer is we just have to find ways to get ourselves there when motivation doesn't show up, right? So I've been on my fitness journey for 8 years now, and I've had times where I've fallen off and gotten back on track. And over the course of 8 years, I can tell you more often than not, the motivation isn't there. It just simply is more of a short-term thing, and it comes and goes. It shows up when it wants to. It's kind of like a flaky friend, right? Like, they're great. You want to hang out with them all the time, but you can't get them to come to things sometimes, right? So more often than not, it's not there. And what we need to do is build the habit of being consistent and build, what's the word I'm looking for? Momentum. We need to build that momentum, and that's what's going to show up for us on the days that motivation doesn't. And in order to build momentum, I like to think about it as like we're putting in the reps, right? We're practicing. The more reps that you put in, the more momentum you are going to have that's going to carry you forward as you keep going when motivation doesn't, right? So like for me, it's like, well, I've been showing up for 8 years now. You know, I can just show up tomorrow even though I don't feel like it, you know, something like that. And it's just going to carry us through. And showing up on the days when we don't feel like it is going to make all of the other days much easier, because it's like, well, if I showed up yesterday and I really didn't feel like it and I still had a good workout, imagine how I can feel today. I'm feeling a little bit better, you know, and it becomes more of like a mental game. And that's really what motivation is. It's a mental game of proving to yourself that you're going to show up anyway. And obviously there will be times when you don't, when you're, you know, maybe sick and you don't have time or something like that. There will always be those times, but learning how to consistently put in the reps and show up on days when you don't feel like it, but you are perfectly capable of showing up, really makes a huge difference. So some things that come into play here that can help us out are building a routine that is realistic for our lives. So I can have the motivation to start a new fitness routine and I want to work out 6 days a week, right? And when my motivation is high, that sounds really awesome. But on a normal day, when my motivation is kind of, you know, in the middle or non-existent, that's just not happening. That's only happening on a super, super motivated week. Everything's perfect. Motivation shows up every single day, and it's butterflies and unicorns and rainbows, right? That's just not realistic. So building a realistic routine that we can do on like a mediocre week. You know what I mean? So setting those expectations to still be challenging and still be exciting, but also realistic. So maybe you're working out 3 days a week, 4 days a week. Maybe at this stage in your life, 2 days a week is what's realistic for you, right? But picking something that's realistic and attainable so that it's easier to keep showing up on days when motivation isn't there. And then another huge piece of this and showing up when motivation is not there is forming a routine that has low barriers to entry, right? So that means basically making a routine where it's easier for you to show up. So a really black and white example of this would be picking a gym that's 30 minutes from your house or a gym that's 5 minutes from your house, right? When you're really motivated, that 30 minutes may feel like nothing. Like, heck yeah, I'm gonna turn up the music in the car on the way there, and it's gonna be a fun time, and I'm really motivated to go spend 2 hours going to the gym, right? But then on days when you're not motivated, that 30 minutes is like a huge mountain that you have to climb in order to show up for yourself. So when we're talking about planning the routine that's going to work for you, we want to think of things that have a lower barrier to entry. So that gym that's 5 minutes around the corner from you, that's a super low barrier to entry compared to a gym that's 30 minutes away from you. And these barriers to entry can be all types of things, but this is just an example, right? So on a day when you have no motivation, it's going to feel a lot easier for you to jump in the car and to drive 5 minutes than it is for you to drive 30 minutes, right? Something like that. And same with timing of things. So a lot of people, when they start their fitness routines and they're super motivated, they're like, oh, I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. every morning and get a workout in. Like, that's what's going to make me feel really great and productive, and I can do this, and I'm going to change my life completely, right? And then, again, maybe that lasts for a few days, maybe it lasts for a week if you're lucky, but if that is a chore for you to get up at 5 a.m. and you're already kind of like not really a morning person, but motivation told you were. When you were motivated, you were a morning person, right? That doesn't really translate so well when motivation doesn't show up, right? So morning workouts can work for some people, but if you know that that's a barrier to entry for you, to have to get up earlier, to go to bed earlier, and you just hate going to bed earlier, maybe afternoon or midday workouts is what's going to work for you best. Picking those things that have a lower barrier to entry, that are just going to be more feasible for your life, that's huge in sticking around. Okay, so I think I'm going to answer one more question here. So let me just look at my list from ChatGPT again. Okay, here's a good one. How can I manage fitness around my menstrual cycle? So there's been a lot out there on the internet lately about cycle syncing. And basically, if you haven't heard of that, that is planning your workouts around your menstrual cycle, maybe taking a rest week during your menstrual cycle and using that as kind of a framework to plan how we work out and exercise. That has been a really huge thing that's been making the rounds on Instagram and other social media lately. So if that has kind of piqued your interest, let's talk about just briefly, how can I manage fitness around my menstrual cycle? So first of all, this is going to be hugely different for every woman out there, depending on what your cycle is like. If you experience super, super heavy cramps during your cycle, I can raise my hand and say that is me. I am one of those people. I used to, have to leave school because of my cycle, and I was basically just debilitated and like out of it for at least the first few days. And so that has been huge in me figuring out how to work with my body, especially around training. So when we think about cycle syncing, there's not a ton of research out there, at least not yet, to kind of prove how our bodies respond to cycle syncing. And especially there's not a lot of research out there that studies women in general, because our cycles make studies more complicated, right? So one thing that I kind of like to think about in terms of cycle syncing is, number one, listening to my body. And if I am having a week where, I'm having cramps and I'm just having a harder time emotionally, with motivation, struggling with things like that, that listening to my body and not being hard on myself in that moment and during that week. And then also what I'm doing is I'm supporting my body, right? So I have found that movement is still very helpful, especially walking, things like yoga, those types of things are still very helpful, and perhaps even more helpful than just sitting on the couch, no matter how much that is all that I want to do, right? So I don't always really recommend taking that week off, and I think a lot of people tend to think about that when we're talking about cycle syncing, taking that week of our periods off and almost kind of like having a break and working around that. But if you think about that and you're someone who, regularly gets your period every month, if you're taking that week off every single month, that's 12 weeks out of the year that we're sacrificing progress in our training, right? So personally, I still like to train during my cycle, during my period, but I may just train a little bit differently. So I may still show up, but I will kind of deload on the weights a little bit. I might go a little lighter. It's really about listening to my body. I've also had weeks where I've been on my period that I have had some of my best workouts, and I might have gone in feeling really crappy, but then I've had some of my best workouts. So I think obviously it all depends on, every single person. We're all so different, but my experience with kind of planning things around my cycle has been that I still show up. And, unless it's not happening, I listen to my body. I still try to show up. Sometimes I surprise myself. Sometimes I have exactly the workout I'm expecting, but I still showed up and I kept that momentum that we were talking about earlier, and I kind of put in the reps anyways. So that has kind of been how I've approached things. Another way that I think we can use cycle knowledge in our training, and that's another thing I will say is knowledge. So if you are not currently tracking, you don't know where you're at, I would highly recommend using an app or using just writing it down in a notebook, keeping track of your cycle so that you know what phase of your cycle that you're in, because we are affected quite differently throughout the different phases as our hormones change. And obviously some of us may feel those effects more than others, but let me stutter here. You may also start to notice things that you might not have before when you start tracking too. So another way that we can kind of use cycle syncing is that when we finish our periods, we enter into a phase where we are just more likely to be more motivated, have higher motivation. And why am I blanking on it right now? Let me pull up my app here. I know the word, I'm blanking on it. So you have your luteal phase and someone give me the 4 phases. Someone help me out. What phase am I blanking on? 4 phases of menstrual cycle. Your follicular phase. Okay, your follicular phase. You're more likely to be more motivated, to be more productive, want to get things done, have new ideas, be more creative. So this is a good time if you want to, if you're doing your workouts, changing things up monthly. Maybe this is the week where you plan to start a new series of workouts, something like that, where you're a little bit more motivated, a little bit more excited. You can kind of work with yourself and your body in this way that I think leaves a lot of opportunity for different things, versus what I think a lot of people think about when it comes to cycle syncing is just like, oh, I'll just take the time that I'm on my period off. And that's how I'll cycle sync, and that's how I'll work around my menstrual cycle. But there's a lot of other ways that we can use this. And so like I like to plan more creative work, more content, brainstorming ideas, writing, stuff like that during my follicular phase, or again, new workouts, things like that. Just kind of understanding where we're at and what kind of tendencies we have. And you might even feel different from that. So I think really the first step is getting to know your body and taking note. Give yourself a few months. Take note of how you feel throughout your cycle and what kind of patterns you start to notice. Again, everyone is so different, so some people may feel more differently than others, but you may start to notice some things when you start to kind of keep track, keep an eye on things. And you can also, it's fun because you can kind of take a little bit more control in this way than kind of just letting your cycle happen to you and kind of working with it and maybe even having some fun with it. So I think those are all of the questions I'm going to answer today. Let me know in the comments if any of these have been helpful for you, if any of these you have more questions on or different questions on. I'd be happy to answer them. And, I might do some more of these in the future. Let me know if you have any other podcast ideas. And I'm so glad that you've joined me for my second podcast. It's gonna be fun. I'm really excited to keep putting out these weekly episodes for you guys. And I hope that you enjoy them too. So with that, I will see you next week. All right, bye-bye.